Well, welcome back. As always, we're doing this webinar with water stories, where we're doing a series all about water cycle restoration. And today we're having on David Spicer to talk about, his perspective as a professional doing this. Like, as a lot as you know, Zach is a professional earthwork practitioner, learning from Sepp Holzer, and he's had a decade of experience. And David is worked alongside Jeff Lawton and others, and really has this giant depth of understanding. Uh, so I'm gonna let Zach. How about you? You do a good intro for David here.
And I'm really excited today to have David Spicer, who, when people ask me, does anyone do what you do? There's always one person that I can refer to, and that's David Spicer, as far as coming on landscapes, helping people understand what they're doing, how to do it, and then actually coming through and implementing the work, which makes you such a better reader of landscapes, designer
Mm.
of landscapes, once you actually have that experience of having done some of the things that we're recommending and talking about. So really excited, always following David's work closely from afar, and really excited to have you on the webinar today and share your knowledge here.
Look, it's a pleasure, mate. Like I say, I love what the Water Stories is doing and empowering people to get out there and get on the ground and get their hands dirty. That's huge because like I like to say, baby steps, baby mistakes. So start small, build the confidence up, but we have to start. That's the biggest thing is actually starting, because once you have one of them small successes, then you really can build on that and continue on. But we need to start. That's all. Like it's the same strategy whether it's small or large. Larger, yes, it's more complex and more cost, but still it's the same principles um, of what we're doing. Whether that's in a garden and harvesting a bit of water to move through the garden, or a larger site. It doesn't matter. You're still working with level. You're still observation is that the great asset that I've had to learn, pattern recognition and pattern application. And once you've got that set, really, don't let the ego dictate. Yeah, as you say, allow the site to demonstrate its evolution. I think that's very powerful. Yeah, and when I say don't let the ego dictate, it's like we put all this energy and focus into a complex design, but really we should be looking at the landscape and allowing it to dictate the way forward. And that's I mean, it gives you a totally different perspective when you're sitting on what I call the bone rattlers. Um, because yes, we're setting out heights across the landscape where we want water to move, but then there's also a whole load of observation when you're excavating through material that you're seeing, and you're going to have to change your approach or manipulate where you want to go on that feedback from the landscape. Yeah.
A lot of people just don't even realize how much Earth changes as you're moving through it and
Mm,
working on it.
mm,
They think of soil where you have one type of soil and it's not, and the more I dig, the more surprised I am about some of the things I
mm,
see and how
mm,
quickly things change. So I just think that's so on point. It's insane to think that it wouldn't change once you've done it for a little bit and realize, oh, I can dig 100 meters over here and I have a whole different
mm,
soil
mm.
texture, barely any clay in it. It starts to really open your eyes of, okay, we don't have as much control here as we might like to think. We really need to work with the materials that are presented to us.
Absolutely, mate. And that's where, big credit to you guys and actually training people to install these works is it gives us a whole nother level of, well, really of confidence and success, because by getting on them bone rattlers and doing the work and like you say about noticing how much material changes is quite profound, and you won't see that as a designer. You even if you're working on the site, you won't see what you're seeing when you're watching that bucket. Each bucket that you're pulling out, what have you hit? A sand seam, or you hit a rock seam? I mean, like in the photo there with the dam, actually right at the bottom of that dam, there was a little fire, like a little charcoal circle. Now I think that's an old Aboriginal fire because there was no seam of charcoal like a root had burnt down prior to that. It was just a little charcoal fire about a foot round, and that's the only rationale that I could think of. But even in that, again, that dam there, you can see you've got your subsoil, like your topsoil, your subsoil, and then you actually went right into a beautiful yellowish clay. So, we could look at doing test cores for working out oil or clay content, but then that actually doesn't show the whole truth because they might miss a seam. So, like you're far better off getting on a machine in a sense and actually digging some test pits across that section of it land that you're working on. Yeah. And then you can look at the photo with the machine. Now that was a pretty poor. This is actually this is from the water storage, one of your students in Canberra, and she contacted me because you guys recommended me to do the work, and I'm about to go back after the new year to do the next stage. But from that was like virtually no topsoil. Canberra's a pretty hard climate. But then you went from that, then you went straight out onto like a ridge gravel, really shaly country, and it just changed from that gentler section to right out onto a hard rocky ridge, right around, because we picked up water from one watershed because there was a culvert coming from the highway and a lot of water that someone else had done work and they didn't do enough freeboard. So that's sort of, earth mound above water level. So it just all blew out, which is, fair enough because they didn't comprehend the volume of water coming out the culverts. And when you're dealing with culverts, you're dealing with what I call shotguns. They just come out in such force. So we need to slow that water up. But really, down with the dinosaurs is a really interesting concept because it changes phenomenally across landscape. And when I was in New Caledonia a number of years ago, even within a 1 megaliter dam, there was probably about 3 different soil profiles in the back cut of that dam. And you just wouldn't have guessed it. Like when we done a test pit, it was really good clay. But as we moved up to the sort of watermark and excavated around the back, there was virtually 3 different types of clay, still good quality material, but different types of clay that come into it, which is, quite profound. And like if you just go back to that other first photo, and I'll just talk. Thanks, Riley. So that the other one with the rock, that's actually in near just outside of Sydney, northwest Sydney, and that again, we're virtually down on the floodplain of the Hawkesbury River there, but it changed in itself, and this is probably a technique that I picked up from Zach's great work about doing a bit of rock work on spillways, particularly on unconsolidated material. No worries. Thanks, Riley. So the first photo of these gorgeous terraces, this is in near Mount Aso in Japan. My wife's Japanese, so this year we went over to Japan and we were having a bit of a holiday up in the mountains. And it's quite a unique landscape for Japan because it's a pastoral community, and they burn it, and that's why you see primarily no trees. Some sections they have go back to an oak forest, and some of it's planted under sugi, Japanese cedar. But when I seen this, it's actually organic rice farm, which is quite great to see. But it's just such a great example of that sort of key point in the landscape. This was spring fed, so they put in a diversion drain to feed it, but it was just absolute stunning as far as I'm concerned. And to think this is done by hand, like we're lucky today that we've got machinery like it's I call an excavator a big shovel because that's how you can work on. But the amount of machinery we have today to move, virtually, well, I myself could probably move 1,000 cubic meters a day, and that's a lot of material. But to think of this work done by hand is just mind blowing as far as I'm concerned, and huge respect to old cultures for creating deposition systems, because virtually that's what they are. In a permaculture context, you could say, or whatever, we go in and put swales in, which, thanks to Zach again, he's influenced my form because I've switched to more terracing these days, because it's much more practical. And I think part of this journey is actually not allowing our egos to get attached to methodologies, in a sense. We need to, what works, use it. I do say I was a permacultist years ago, and I think as a teacher, we have to actually be a little bit careful, because the power of a teacher is quite profound, because people take what a teacher says as gospel, and they get fixated on that, and they don't want to deviate that because that might upset their teacher. And it's only from me doing some teaching that I've come to this realization of how much power you have. And it's not, I'm not talking about an egotistical power, but it's an influential power. And because when you're up on a stage and you're actually doing the work to so you can profess to know, so people give you value as a teacher because you've done it, you've got to realize how much power you have. And that's been a bit of a journey for me to comprehend that. So it's taken me a number of years to switch from going swale, as my teachers would have put it, to going, well, hang on, looking at, say, Zach's work, going, well, that actually makes sense. And once I'd done a few of them, and I realized how much easier they are to maintain and interact with, and the more diversity they give you of access and interaction. Because one of the things I've found, what I do now is by creating good access, and that's what terraces can do over swales. Actually, good access creates good interaction, because if clients can't access the landscape, they don't interact with it. It's off to the side. As soon as you create that access point, it creates a whole nother view, another area of engagement that draws you out of your immediate zone into the broader landscape. And if you can do that comfortably walking, which terraces again give you, you actually can get into this meditative state, and that's where you observe and learn. But that's been quite a big learning curve for me. Is this influence of access, and creating that access really, really does change how a client engages into the site, and then you influence their learning. It's quite a big one. So big credit to traditional societies for creating deposition systems by hand. It's just phenomenal. If you can just go back again, Rayleigh, sorry, mate. But so seems to be the photo of Morocco was quite well received. And so this is a good friend of mine, Laurent Levy in Morocco, who's got a beautiful guest house. And if you need a contact, hit me up. He's a great guy, great host. So really, like Morocco here 250 mil rainfall. Like it's bloody dry and it's hard. And it's called this landscape translates to the son of the little sun. It's all shale country. And it's got a bit odd actually. There's clay up the top, but there's nothing in the bottom. And I think that's because it's been washed off. You know, it's quite profound. So this is a beautiful little Key Point Dam. Now I wasn't here when it was constructed. Wasn't there, sorry, when it was constructed. And there's a couple of little points that I could point out here. One, so we've got a gradient road that actually harvests the water to the dam. And I have put off a backflood swale, which again can harvest water to the dam. But the other part is it actually takes that water that would have dropped down in that valley and it takes it around the ridge point into the major part of the property. So it takes water from one watershed into another. But this dam was never constructed properly. So you can actually look along the dam wall that it's actually got some cracks in it. And that's because they haven't track rolled that down. They've just tamped it down. But you can see the amount of erosion, like these runnels that have happened. So really we've gone, counter to that. And it's worked quite well, really, for an arid landscape. It's a tricky landscape. I got there and I was like, my God, what am I going to do? And then what I'm finding is if we can get something through the mid slope as our start point, and then we can get something on just off the crest of the ridge, and then, maybe something in the valley. But if you've got them two lines that you're working with, really you've gained control, if we can call it control, of water movement through the landscape. We've enhanced the landscape because we've held water really high, ideally for gravity-fed water system, that dam is, to tree crops. And we've slowed the water down so we can pacify it. And then if you can get something through the mid-slope, which then creates the access through the whole section of the land. And there's probably one of my Nat Topa, which you guys have had on there. And Nat Topa is an absolute legend. She's such a powerhouse, that woman. I've got huge respect for her. She asked me, I was teaching a course in Morocco, Portugal in 2019. She said, what's my greatest mistake? And I think I was too egotistical back then. And I was like, just a couple of swale blowouts. But my greatest mistake, I think, as a designer was I put a swale, before I got into Zach's work, I'd done this in 2017, I put in a swale, and my biggest mistake is that either should have been a big terrace or a gradient road. Because it would have given access right through the mid-slope. So you can come up the ridge points or down the ridges. You know what I mean? It was a large 90 acre property. So it's a fair bit of land, but creating that access right through the mid slope gives you the best of both worlds. Yeah.
Absolutely. And those lessons are so key. And I feel like the things that never get shared as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that. That all great stuff. Just one thing I wanted to add as well. We just toured in Trebon, Czech Republic, with some of the new water paradigm folks. These fish ponds that were built 600 to 800 years ago,
wow,
all by hand. One of them, the biggest one, the dam is 1/3 the size of the Grand Pyramid of Giza. So it gives you a sense for, the deposition systems, like you're saying, the ancient civilizations used to make by hand before they had any of this equipment and machinery available.
Yeah,
That's
quite
wild.
profound. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you move earth with a shovel and a wheelbarrow, you really get a comprehension of the amount of work when you look at these systems, and if we start off with a machine, we never comprehend that. If you don't do the effort of, and it's probably one of the reasons I'm pretty handy on a machine. I can move a lot of material, and I'm lucky I can give that artistic finish too. But it's actually from the shovel is why I think I can move that amount of material, because I know how to move it by have physically done it by hand. So I use that same efficiency, because when you're doing it by hand, you're looking at the path of the least amount of movements, aren't you? You know, move material downhill, that's going to be a lot easier than moving material uphill. You know, all these physical things, and that relates to a machine because it's a lot more economic to move material downhill, you know, instead of dragging it uphill. Yeah, so the power of effort and getting your hands dirty. Start small, like as I said before, it's no different. So this Eagles Deep, this was a great project. And there were already 3 dams. So them 3 dams that you see in the design were already there. And all I done really was connect backflood swales to it and put some of the access in. And it was quite one of the interesting things about this project. I done it in multiple stages. And the first stage I done is I put a backflood swale off the lower dam, which is where there was a shed, and that's where they were setting up the infrastructure. And then the guys started to put in a garden, and they were really perplexed. And there's a couple of things on this. One, people don't realize how much fences influence people's minds, particularly in Australia or America, where you've got large bits of landscape and we've fenced it off for cattle grazing. A lot of people look at a fence and it actually creates a mental barrier. They can't connect one piece of landscape. They can't see the whole landscape. They actually see it divided up because of the fence. Now, you know, I've done lots of different jobs before I started doing this sort of stuff. And fencing's one of them. So I'm just like, cut the bastard. You know, repattern the fence. Like, it's not a physical thing. But the other one was they were putting in this garden, and they were like questioning me, like, where, you know, in a permaculture context, where should, you know, our zone 2 stop? And so what I'd done was I connected up a big backflood swale to the centre dam. And as soon as that swale went in, that actually created a division in the landscape. So that gave them a limit to their zone 2 garden, to their main crop garden. And then as soon as on the other side, or the top side of the swale, went straight into pasture and tree systems. It designs itself, you know, and that's where any design work I do a basic mainframe design. I don't like, this one's pretty and nice, and that's my beautiful wife's artwork. But really, the having the 3 dams into position already designed itself. Like this one, it designs itself. Once you get them major elements in place, then you've got divisions in the landscape. You know, if you've got the access along them points, which again, terraces create, or gradient roads create, which are another great addition I'd like to see more people use, particularly in arid landscapes. And I will write an article on it, but recently I wrote an article on to swale or terrace and why, you know. And because, you know, there's a lot of people out there go swale, 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 and that's fine, okay. But there's you know, I'll use a swale when you've got a lot of water coming down at some impoundment that we're creating. I'll choose a swale, because a swale has a big, chunky freeboard. You know, the mound's thicker in the swale mound. If you go steep, well, it's harder, but generally you can create a swale with a big, chunky freeboard, like nice and thick, so it can take a big volume of water. And then I drop it into a terrace. And that's I thought it was a relevant point, like relevant subject to talk about, of why I'm choosing whether I still do swales and where I'll do a swale and why. But primarily, I'll go a terrace any day. because they're more functional. So or a gradient road. But really, if you look at that landscape, yeah, it's just once you get that basic mainframe, then really you section up the landscape, and it can design itself, you know. And back to sort of creating that good access is good interaction. Yeah. Yep. All right, next one. So this was a project in northern New South Wales, at near a little place called Tyalgum, and it was a bit of a emotional journey for me because just up the road was Tagari Farm, which is Bill Mollison's old farm that I volunteered on in 1999. Makes me feel old. But, you know, that's where I seen, I couldn't comprehend Earthworks. You know, I'd done a course, yeah, okay, I may retain 30%. It certainly got me inspired. And I said, well, that's all great and well, but where can I go to get some practical experience, you know? And even though Bill's old farm was 148 acres or something like that, had all sorts of earthworks on. And it wasn't until, and I you know, done a lot of work on the ground and I slashed it. So when you're slashing, that's probably a good thing to talk about. Well, two things actually. I just recently done a job and I asked the clients to cut the grass and they didn't. And it makes it very frustrating to actually put a finish on landscape when you got a lot of grass mixed with topsoil. But when you're slashing a landscape by hand or machine, you actually really get a good feel for the landscape because you're riding it. So it's like cutting the grass. But so this was a bit of a not an emotional, but, you know, it was quite a full circle to be back at Tagari or Tyalgum 2015 or years later. And they had some existing dams. Now, I did do a key point dam and a backflood swale off it, and before I got into the terraces, thanks, Zach. But the client also wanted these existing dams retrofitted. And I think there's a bit of a job for people in retrofitting existing dams, putting some pattern and some edge on it for diversity. So, you know, like there's one, the top left shot is like there's a terrace that'll actually, when the dam's full, it'll sit underwater. So there's like a shallow shelf. So diversity, you know, water edge plants. There's a tree they wanted down. And so instead of just cutting it into firewood, let's create some habitat out of it. So let's place some stumps or logs in the water. And it's quite amazing, you know, you put one of these stumps or logs in the water, and probably about half an hour, if that, you actually see a bird come in and land on it, you know, and yes, done. You know, it's pretty cool. Yeah, then you've got like a few sort of like Chenampa inspired sort of material, you know, just to put a bit of crenulation on the dam. And it's just about edge, you know, nature loves edge. And you know, I always say you only got to take one step in the right direction and nature takes 10. And often like this sort of work is that one step. Any deposition system is one step. So we pulled up material and created a bit of crenulation so water backs up when it's full, but also you got some high ground, you know, some submerged sections, yeah, just a bit of edge really. And again, that's a similar photo there on the bottom left is, again, it's just that bench and a bit of log habitat. And just some shelving, you know, that there's a terrace on the left, the bottom right, that sits under the water. So it was all about just creating a bit more edge for biodiversity. Yeah. And it changes. Like I say, you put that log in or some sort of habitat and a bird comes in. You know, that's the start of life. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, well, this is one of my favorite photos, actually. The one with the rock work. because it just goes to show what a profound effect some rocks, well-placed rocks, create. So there was water coming off the road, and as a new road, because I redressed it and reshaped it, it's going to have a lot of sediments come off it. And so we just placed some rocks around there to create little silt traps. And you know, you guys, like the guys out there starting, this is a great one from my observation. Grab half a dozen rocks, chuck them in a drain somewhere, and watch what happens. You know, watch the amount of silt build up, and also watch in time what germinates in that silt, because any deposition system is going to drop its silt load, whatever it's carrying. I've got a great shot of this same situation. Well, technique in Morocco in these little runnels where we just put some rock buns across the runnel, and that was it. And either side of it has no vegetation, but where we created the deposition system, full of life, full of diversity, because you created the sponge. And that's pretty simple work that anyone can take on as a learning curve and steps. Doesn't have to be big, small, that's fine. So yeah, the next one's of a dam that we done in Portugal. It wasn't the greatest material, but that's what the client wanted. It did have a spring behind it. So a hell of a lot of big boulders in the back of that dam. This guy, Lewis, was a fantastic. I'm pretty good on an excavator, I could say, but this guy just outshone me, and he picked up the process so well and translated into French, you know. He was Portuguese, but just such a lovely guy to work with. And it just, yeah, if you don't operate machinery, one of the biggest things is being able to communicate with your operator. Are they on the same page? Is a big one. You know, do they actually care and have a bit of passion? But yeah, so this is the high dam, and it just we put a spillway out and around the corner. Obviously, the topsoil has gone back on. That's the water line where the base material meets the topsoil. So it's got a good amount of freeboard. It was up high in the mountains in northern Portugal, so reasonable rainfall. Yeah, it came out quite well. And you know, always my end result is a happy client. That's a testament, you know, and empowering people to act. This is in south coast, New South Wales. And this is a before and after. So what I've got there, this is actually a emergency spillway. So I hooked up a dam, I think if I'll get it right, up the top end. And I wanted the spillway to go over into the next dam. But when you put a pipe for a crossing, you got to remember that you're constricting the outlet, because only a certain amount it was a 300 pipe, but it was only a foot pipe. There's only a certain amount of water can go through that. And what happens when that pipe's full? This is where we've got to think about. So what I done is I put in a secondary spillway. I think it was 100 mil higher than the primary spillway. So as soon as the spillway reached going over 100 mil and the pipe was about 50 mil going off full, I put in the emergency spillway. Water could go over, because we've got to think about big events. Like, yes, we can do calculations and all that, we need to, but you know, I don't get too caught up, maybe because I've got experience now, but a bit of work of putting in another spillway 50 mil, 100 mil higher, it takes a lot of stress and worry off the system, because as a designer operator, we can't blame the operator for making the mistake. You know, we've got an extra layer of responsibility that we've got to take because we done it. You know, it's not that bloody operator. You know. So yeah, so just so easy and so quick to put in an additional spillway just in case, you know, we have these bigger extreme events, which, you know, we are having. So it's always nice to have an insurance policy. Yeah. And then that's, I think, about 12 months after the second photo. So this is a little chain of ponds that I constructed in southwest Western Australia, near Margaret River. I actually come over to redo a dam, and the client, I was meant to come for a week and I ended up staying for 3 weeks. But this is a chain of ponds. So I redid a dam, put a bit of bentonite in it because it was a bit leaky, reshaped it, track rolled it down. You know, maybe a bit too much money and no idea what to do with. And a good friend, well, who has often these clients become a friend. This was a guy, was a Frenchman, Jon, who's now in Portugal. I'll give him a few tips on earth moving excavator operation, and he's doing work now, which is great. But the client said to me, his boss, what could we do here? And I said, well, we could do a little chain of ponds. So it's a bit unconventional because it's not in a valley, but this is all fill out of the big dam behind on the back side of the photo. So we created a little chain of ponds, and it's all got rock spillways, and this is about probably 6 months after I'd done the work, and Jon sent me a photo. Again, you know, stumps. All these stumps were in a big pile, going to be burnt. I said, well, can I actually pull them out and put them in the ponds as habitat? So yeah, so one just fills up from the dam, overflows, a nice level sill sort of spillway down into the next pond. There was a bit of manipulation, and we brought a bit of clay in to track roll it down. Make sure, you know, water couldn't go over the bank. Because there was a road there, and it would have went on their arena like that. But it totally changed the view because you actually drove across a very large, like about a 5 megaliter dam wall, and it was either just grass or something that you can, when you're driving past, you can actually engage in. So you had a great viewpoint of these chains of ponds, and they loved it. And we planted it out with natives and etc. Some aquatic species around the edge. Yeah, great bit of biodiversity enhancement. Yeah. Okay, so this is in Gingellic, on the New South Wales Victorian border on the Murray River. This was a challenging bit of landscape. So this is actually 600 metres from the valley floor to the ridge. It's a big bit of land, and it's primary shale country. One of the really interesting things is rock strata, where the rock was vertical, like the shale rock was vertical. It actually built quite a good depth of topsoil because it acted as an impoundment. But as soon as the geology changed and the rock went horizontal, it was bone dry, no topsoil. Yeah, it was very interesting, again, to be on the machine working. And to be digging through landscape, you really, because you look at it and you wouldn't think it's going to be any different, but to actually excavate into it, it's quite profound. So it's pretty hard country. So this is initially it was a gradient road, so that this road is 450 meters. and it fed. So this is a couple of projects or two different timeline of projects. So the first photo on the left is a gradient road that is 450 meters that fed an existing dam, because this is 2,500 acre site. And Tim he's a great holistic management grazer, really like 300 cattle on an acre of landscape, and he just impounded it. It's quite profound what he could do. But his limiting factor is running out of water. So that was his limit. So that's why he asked me to come in. And just as a perspective, a mate of mine, I won't say his name, but he's a good designer, but again, he's set in a paradigm. He come and actually done the consultancy with me, or just come along because he was staying at home. And so what are you going to do? You're going to put a swale and then a road. And I said, why would you do that? Why would you do two lines of work? That's twice the cost for the client. And this is where I went, well, no, I'd do a gradient road. So this road has a 1 in 400 fall. So for every 100 meters, it's falling 250 mil. Bit tricky to cut in, because it's not much to the eye. It's level, but it ain't. So it's got a tilt on it. It's got about a 300 mil tilt on it from the outer edge of the road to the inside of the drain is about 300 mil. So basically, because this is like inspired with Darren Doherty, Regarians. Again, so this is where it comes back to the breaking the paradigm of the teacher, because if I stayed with the paradigm of my teachers, then I'd be swale. But I've opened my view and I've gone, well, that works. Like I seen what Zach does, the terracing, that works. So I seen Darren do this, and I have done a couple of days of his course. I didn't do the whole course, but they invited me down, which I was very honoured to go down. So, but this one line of work, 450 mil, charges his dam multiple times a year. So done. And put access through the mid-slope. So he could actually run a fence along there if he wants for his HM grazing, and he can strip graze or, cell graze to the ridge and cell graze to the valley. Other than that, he certainly couldn't drive around there, but that's where through that sort of mid-slope really opened it up. So off that, Tim asked me to come back and do some more of these gradient roads because he realized how effective they were. And again, he was running out of water. So this is another one on much gentler country, a gentler section of the property. But this is a gradient road, so it feeds the dam, and then it actually went up a ridge. So it continued with the access theme so he could move livestock, but it actually gave him water storage. So it's a win-win, really. So again, it's that 1 in 400 fall, every metre, 250 mil. Like so, it takes a little bit to put in. Once it's in, it's very effective. One of the interesting things about this, this is in 2009, we had a huge fire quite close to where I live. This is about an hour from my old house, which I love to become a bit of a gypsy. And currently I'm in far north Queensland in the tropics. So I'm getting an education of climates. But one of the interesting things about this, and particularly HM grazing and the value of it, so 3 weeks after the fire had raced across the landscape, they did have a 50 mil rain event, which made a mess, but that often comes with fire. But, well, a couple of things. One, 3 weeks after the fire, Tim had a green tinge across the landscape, and I was there for about 6 weeks, so you can sort of see the difference. And actually, on the bottom right-hand side, the screen, the last photo over there, you can see there's a fence line. On one side, there's no growth, and the other side, there's growth. And that's because that's a boundary. And that was a conventionally grazed property on the left side, and the green side was Tim's. So by doing that smart grazing and you're whacking down that carbon, so it's in contact with the ground, life could come back. Now, one of the interesting things, again, by being on the machine and doing the work, I was in a section of the land, and this is after the green tinge had come back, and I noticed that in a sea of green, little short vegetation, there was a burnt cow pad. So the fire had raced through, but the only place it actually burnt to the soil was on a cow pad. There was still an inch of organic matter because Tim had grazed it with high impact, lot of animals, and actually pushed it down, and the oxygen couldn't get in. The fire raced over the top of it, but it still left an inch of organic matter on top of that landscape, which is why it responded so quick. Again, yeah, just by being on the machine, you see these things. Yep, so put in your mindset gradient roads. Okay, so this is a bit interesting. So from the left with the mirror, this was this is the same place, Angelic. You can see the fire up the top of the ridge. This was let's just say, it's probably close to a 60 to 70 degree slope on this landscape. And I actually drove the excavator up over that hill, and it was a fearful thing because the road was narrow and the machine actually kept lurching. The slough wouldn't stay in one space, so the bucket kept lurching. Yeah, I had a bit of fear that day. And I'm generally pretty brave, but I wasn't that day. But Tim had done a lot of good work, and this was a little incision. This is an eroded gully that he filled in, but because the fire had come through, they had a 50 mil rain to dump in about an hour. So no vegetation. It actually created an incision. So you can sort of see in the middle photo at the bottom of it. So Timo said, well, look, you do what you want. And this is, there was no design. I was like, okay, so I think it was a 25-ton machine. It's ticking away. I'm like, all right, well, what am I going to do? So what I've done is I created a series of little ponds. And on one side, on the gentler side, I created the pond. So it's a deposition system. So the water slowed down. So when water hits water, it becomes passive. Bored up the freeboard so the water couldn't go over the wall, brought it out onto a little level sill. So the water come down, hit the pond, filled up, went out onto the secondary floodplain, you could say, sheeted over, down into another pond. And I've done about 6 of them down this little eroded valley. And it's worked quite well. Like, I'd never done this before. I just, okay, well, what could I do? That there was no point putting one swale in, I had to create a series of little deposition systems to create shock absorbers to slow the water up, pacify it, bring it out to vegetated area, let it sheet over. So again, it's passive, back into the next little pond, on it goes. So that was the approach. And as far as I haven't been back there, but, I've got no report that it didn't work. It's kind of hard being jumping out of the norm and doing odd things. But if we don't do these things, we never learn as well. Tim had great confidence in me. So he said, look, you do what you think. Yeah. All right. So again, same sort of spot. So this is... so I'll start with the left. I put in what he wanted, huge amount of water coming down this valley. And basically it's come down the valley and actually straight into the creek and gone off the site. So we've picked up water from one watershed and we've taken it over to the other side of the ridge. So it's in the other watershed. And then it a big long level sill, so it's sheeted over and down onto a gentler landscape so he could grow grass. You can see the material. So after I'd done this, there's quite a lot of rain, and you can see the gravel and also the charcoal that come off the landscape. After the rain of this one, there's probably about 2 inches, 50 mil of charcoal sediment in the bottom of this swale. So there's a testament of when we look at traditional systems, why did they put all this work into creating deposition systems? Because it works. It builds soil fertility. This is probably a good example of when I talked about why I would swale over terrace, because this section needed a good chunky freeboard because there was a lot of water coming off this. There's probably about a good 50 acres of catchment. Again, probably a 70-degree slope, unvegetated because of the fire. So I knew there was a huge amount of water coming off at speed. How best could I slow it up and pacify it? What I probably should have done was actually created a big pond. Well, big, as in I created more of a silt trap at the back end of this swale where it started. That's probably, in hindsight, looking at it, that's me mistake there. But that all worked quite well. This is a nice high dam, a beautiful key point, beautiful clay. So again, brought water from one watershed from another valley over the ridge point into a smaller valley, but it was the best position, the most economical spot to put that dam. Again, it's not for habitat, this is for water, for grazing, for livestock. But it's a beautiful key point dam, filled up after we had that rain, almost filled up over a week of rain. So it was a great spot, great position, give the farmer water security. And again, you can see the swale in that's the spillway, probably a little bit rough, but I think I was getting a bit tired. This is another thing I'll just mention. When I get messy, I like to stop because I know my brain has had enough. Because when you're on a machine, it is like, yes, if you're just digging a hole, well, my mind wanders when I'm digging a hole. If I'm building a dam, I'm off with the fairies. I'm focusing on what I'm doing somewhat. But when you're actually cutting to level and your attention is on that machine, as soon as you start getting messy, stop, get off, have a break, go for a walk, have a bit of observation. It's just something I'm trying to learn to do more of, but it's a really important point because if you keep forcing yourself to continue, you won't be happy with the result. And that's an example where I try to be really, really accurate is spillways. Particularly if I'm not using rock. This is the farm dam. I generally don't use rock on farm dams because I'm cutting a spillway into original vegetated ground. But you can see my mistake, like there's a little bit, you can see the water edge. That should be one sill across there. But really, nature's pretty incredible because once it's vegetated, then the vegetation takes hold of it. But it's only on when I put it, like I actually asked Zach for advice when I started doing terracing. I said, well, how do you do a terrace? How do you do a spillway over a terrace? Because it's not original ground. And that's where you really need to bring that rock work. So you create a nice rock rundown to make sure it's not going to erode. But if I cut a spillway on original ground that's vegetated below it, generally I wouldn't put rock. Only because it's extra work and it's extra cost, and is it warranted? From my evidence, particularly for farm dams, that yeah, once it's vegetated, it's fine. Yeah, so that's that one. And you can see it's in a beautiful Key Point Valley. This is back to, Morocco again. That's probably a better shot of the cracks in the dam wall that you can see. And that's because it's not track rolled down. It's very thin in the top. So yeah, he obviously, well, again, it could be my mistake because I actually pegged out the watermark. And this is part of doing it, of when you're constructing. If I was doing that, I wouldn't have been so greedy and would actually decrease the size of the dam. So I had more material to give a better grade and a wider dam wall. So you can sit the machine on it and track roll it down to get your freeboard. So it's probably good that, the older I get, my ego's getting slapped down and tuned down. And I think this is a good thing because, you hit a bit of fame and it's very easy to allow the ego to run. So to all you young, inspiring restoration folks, just, my advice is keep that ego in check. It's a bit hard, particularly when you do get well known and have done good work. But yeah, admit your mistakes. So I'm learning, We're always like, at the moment, I'm like, what do I actually know? Because the more you know, the more you realize you have to know. So it's almost put me in a sense of doubting myself. Like when I first started, I was doubting myself. Oh, geez. And then I hit some sort of level of fame and, flying around the globe and like, oh, yeah, some sort of superstar. And my ego took hold. And now I'm like, well, what do I actually know? Anyway, that's my personal journey. I'm not, don't have to take my advice. It's just a personal journey. So this is, back to the Tyalgum job. This is a bit of an interesting thing. I've actually put in a pipe, so it's a ridge point dam for a market garden. So we've harvested water off a access road, like from outside the property, a ridge road. So we harvested water. That's what feeds this dam, and we've put in a pipe now. So for gravity fed water. This is a earth mover, Glenn Armstrong, based in northern New South Wales. Probably the best earth mover I've ever seen. Like 25-ton machine, you run that thing around and he's so accurate. And he said, well, locking pipes, because if you put a locking pipe in a dam, it's actually probably a couple of $1,000. With the heavy wall PVC and your flange joints and then your baffle and all this. So he said, well, what I do is I put some saddles, the tap saddles. So you saddle that bolts around the poly pipe and you drill a hole with a spade bit, put a tap stand in. So they call them in Australia tap saddles. So there are these pipes like that, and then it's like a flange that bolts around the outside. It's got a little O-ring. You bolt it down. So I put 2 tap saddles, and this is his advice, 2 tap saddles opposite each other, bag of bentonite, and track rolled it in. And that stopped the water tracking down the outside of the pipe and being able to run through the dam. So because if any water tracks down the outside of the pipe, it hits the bentonite, which swells up over time and creates a plug. The dam's still there. Anyway, that was a bit interesting. So I thought I'd take a photo. Oh, again, I was a bit brave to do it, but I trusted the earth mover. As a story, if I heard that secondhand, I wouldn't do it. But I know Glenn, and I've seen his work, and I've taught an Earthworks course with Glenn doing the earth moving, and he's an incredible operator. Glenn Armstrong, if you're in the Northern Rivers at all, he'd be the man I'd use. But anyway, that worked. Saved the client a couple of $1,000. Yeah. Okay, so this is is this video, is it?
Yeah, we're just doing a little
Yep.
video.
Yeah, beautiful, mate. Give my voice a rest.
Oh, there's no, it was just a music over it. So if there's anything you want to
Okay.
say over the
All right.
video.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, if you just go back from the start and so one of the slides had the little rock deposition. This is actually the dam. So there's a large 5 megaliter dam behind that, a rock rundown from the culverts. So we relined this with bentonite, changed the axis, and that's the actual chain of ponds. I think it goes down. So replace the spillway. You can see the dam wall is the road. There's a bit of rock work that we done just to stop the water running over the edge. Topsoil back on, vegetated, water's beautiful and clean. Critical to put the topsoil back on. And then it overflows into these chains of ponds. So again, a level sill spillway. Because this was unoriginal ground, I rocked it. So one of the things about spillways like this, you need to keep an eye on them and sometimes cut the grass. So it runs down into the first little chain of pond. You can see we shoot our levels. So we've got some rocks, some logs above level. It's all very. If there was any bare soil that wasn't vegetated, so you can see the nice bit of funky work with the stumps and for the habitat. Overflows again into the next little chain of ponds. Again, overflows into another one. And that's the dam wall that you drive along and you actually see it. And then into the last little pond. I was really pleased with it. I think it just come up beautiful. And think of the diversity of life that would, want to move into here. And this is what we can really create. So this is something small. You're not dealing with complex. It's just I like it when I do a job if people give me a creative license, because then we're not set by the design. We're actually set by the landscape dictating what we can do, and this is one of it. So you can see the sort of work, trees, rocks, habitat. Think of the diversity of life that's gonna move in and set up camp here, and it's beautiful. I'm really pleased with it. I'm very pleased with that. It was a great job.
Awesome. Thanks, David. What a powerhouse. That was great. We went over, did everything, and we fit it into an hour. So it worked out perfect.
Well.
Yeah. But last but not least, we'd love you if there's anything you want to share about how people can contact you about your work, who want to hire you, help you, put on a workshop. I'd love to know that.
All right. So Instagram or Facebook, Doc Spice Permaculture. I've had to recreate a domain name because some bastard stole it on me, but anyway, we won't go there. So docspice.life, which is kind of fitting because I'm not a permaculturist anymore. It's more about creating lifeboats and life support systems, which we all need to engage in. So you can either email spicepermaculture@gmail or david@docspice.life is a new email I set up. But I give half an hour free sort of consultation before I start charging. So if you've got questions, I'm happy to have a bit of a look at your site, give you a bit of feedback. And if you want to move forward from there, do it. I also do online mainframe design as a basic theme of what I would suggest. And I do that for anywhere in the world. A couple of them, one of the designs in the slides was that. Follow me on social media, whatever. Just let's get engaged. And often, a lot of my friends are actually clients. So because one of the things I've found is it's quite an emotional journey, and particularly for women. Probably about 50% of my clients are women. And when you jump on a bit of landscape with a big machine and you start pulling it apart, it's quite emotional. And people can get, they're often, they buy this piece of land and they've got all this vision of how they want it to look. And you get on a machine and you start knocking things around. It's quite an emotional journey. And then we bring it all back together and the skin comes back on and the water's there and it all looks great. So often I find that with clients, when you do earthworks, you create quite a strong bond. Yeah. But anyway, people can follow me work. However they like.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kevin. And I like how all your videos kind of start like, hey, good day here, Doc Spicer. Like, Doc Spice here, Doc Spice here. It's like, I really like that. Every video.
Oh, thank you.
Really fun.
Yeah. Keeping it in Australia.
Awesome presentation. So many of the things you said, I just was like, oh, that's so spot on all throughout. So really appreciate it. I think also, really taking in everything that works and different things apply in different areas. And that's such a good lesson. And, always being humble enough to learn more. I think that's what makes really good practitioners. And I think you embody that better than anyone else out there.
Oh.
So really appreciate you sharing all your wisdom and knowledge here. First question for you, David. On dam construction, when you dig the trench for the barrier layer, how do I know or how can I tell that I've dug deep enough to get a waterproof layer? What simple test is there to determine the clay content of the soil required for safe dam construction?
Probably the simplest test.
Add in this last bit, which I can remind again if you like. But the thickness of the barrier layer depends on the height of the dam, doesn't it? Are there empirical figures on this? How do I compact the barrier layer if no roller or other heavy machinery is available?
Well, I think part of it is doing your test pits, because you're actually coming down into the geology and you're going through one of the slides at the start was this dam in a key point, and that went through topsoil, subsoil, reasonable clay, but it wasn't until I actually went down about maybe 1.5 meters that I actually started to hit this beautiful yellow clay. Now that plasticity like that in the hand, what is going to form better, the fingers, pushing it between the fingers to feel the material. Other than that is putting it in a simple jar test. And you can do the best one is like quite a large jar, put in 100 ml of material and then water, and then you can actually calculate a percentage of clay if you like. But it's the tactileness is a big one though, but before you even look at doing a dam, do a test pit. So don't think I'm going to build a dam there. Well, what is the material? Look, and depth of keyway, well, that to me is or your trench is determined on the material, how it looks. And there's some reasonable products out there now. There's a polymer, which is a polymer, so your choice to use it, called Dammit in Australia. That actually combined with bentonite, because bentonite can be a bit hit and miss, does work. You can still do diaphragm dams. So yes, one of the interesting things, I was doing a job in New Caledonia, and the earth moving company, who thought I was going to be a consultant and sit on a chair, and they were quite French about it. And then I jumped on the machine. They were, oh, you're right. Come and have smoko with me. But the engineers told them to do the keyway or the trench to actually physically lock it in the landscape. And that's true, but they never learned anything about actually stopping the water movement. So it was a great learning curve for them. But, do your test pit, or do your keyway so it's physically locked into the landscape, and do a diaphragm dam, and that's a clay or good material, and yeah, bentonite, damn it. There's a few products out now that you can do what they call a diaphragm dam. So your better material laid out, probably a couple of layers. So one layer at 250, 200, and then another layer on top of that, track rolled down, good moisture content. Whether you got good material or not, it's the moisture content that makes it compact. Without that, and for the compaction, well, if you're doing it by hand, look at the old techniques of doing earthen floors. What do they use? Or rammed earth, a wooden block on a timber handle, boom, boom, boom. That if that's your choice, that's what you got to do. Yeah. So hopefully that answers some questions.
Yeah, that was brilliant, brilliant. And I'll add too, if it's thin enough layers and you want to do a lot of dancing or stomping on your heels too, in Africa we've done it that way before. So it's all a matter of pressure over a given area, and so you can put that in your favor if you don't have these heavy equipment and things available to you. But
Totally.
you're going to learn real quickly why everyone uses them if they do have them available as well, just from the scale and scope of what you're able to accomplish like that.
That's a great point, Zach, because even if you go over 300 with a 20-ton machine, you're still not going to get compaction on that. So this is, lots of mistakes have been made, is people rushing it. I know that like the Gov, thing in Australia is 150. I think that's a bit over the top. But certainly if you're doing it by hand, put in 100 mil, 4 inches, tamp it down. That's a great, or 50 mil, that's a great point. So yeah.
And so many good questions here. Definitely, since Brian was one of our guests here, it'd be fun to ask his question. There's a really good one by Todd and Steve, and we have a live question and maybe one from Kaylee. How about we jump into Brian's questions first? Brian says, I have found that swales are really well used and backflood tools, and terraces are great for access and water catchment. Is this what you have found? Do you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, as I tried to articulate, a terrace can still backflood, so there's no difference. I mean, they still can be connected to a dam. In my view of a terrace, I still set out a height of a terrace, and it still holds water. Now, maybe I've got the terminology wrong, but it's just more of a gentler form of earthworks. Still can access, but the swale is that chunky freeboard. So it's a different shape. That's sort of my view of, and maybe it's my terminology that creates some confusion, but a terrace, what I'm doing as forming a terrace is I'm putting about a 300 mil tilt back into the slope. So it can hold 150 mil of water, and it's got 150 mil of freeboard. Okay. Whereas if it's a big volume of water, that's where I'll choose a swale form. I'm still using them as a water harvester or a conduit, or a conduit from a dam to either run water to a dam or back flood up the terrace. Because often we want to take water from one watershed and shoot it over into the next.
I would highly recommend David's article about this, which I put in the chat here again as well.
Thanks,
really well written, and I think covers this topic really well. For those interested in learning more about it, I highly recommend reading that article.
Here's one that's a very interesting technology question. This is from Todd. He's saying, I've worked in automated machine control systems for 40 years. I'm not seeing anyone utilizing machine control for this type of work. Why is that? So, how there's like automated, crop systems for kind of large row crops, but why isn't anybody doing this for kind of like automated machine excavating?
Look, sometimes I'd love that, because that's why I call excavators bone rattlers. Pretty hard on the body. I wouldn't argue with one, but we've got sensors, and I don't know, maybe you can have a heap of cameras on that machine that you can see the geology, but there's, like even the time when you're sitting on a machine, you pick up a bucket and you're slewing around. Often I'm not just thinking about what I'm doing there. I'm looking at the broader concept, context of the landscape. It may only be a couple of seconds, but if I pick up a bucket of material and I slew around to place it, my mind wanders for that period, and I'm looking and thinking about where my heights are, what am I going to do up there. So I suppose it comes back to, as much as I'd like it sometimes, being on site is using your senses, also having that creative outlet. I do call myself a functional artist, and I think that art, like all art, is experiential. It's textual. It's all your senses engaged, and it's a little bit like that Zen, that Zen mindset, because you almost switch off and you create. And if yes, I'm guided by heights, but I'm in a creative mode too. So maybe you can do that with tech. I wouldn't argue. Be the first to get out there and do it. Yeah. But just, you still need to be on site. Sorry?
Exactly. And it's hard to overemphasize how much material changes as you're working on the site. Yes, some places it's almost all the same. And in those places, yeah, maybe you could have a dozer on a 3D program that just pushes stuff around and compacts it. But I might, in this spot, dig my key to 2 meters, and then 5 meters over, it might be 2 meters 50. And another 5 meters over, it might be 3 meters, because that's where the geological layer is. And I think that's why, one, it really helps to be this designer builder where you're the one implementing the thing. It is, I loved what you were saying at the start, David, and there's no one else to blame. So you're stuck with your own work when you're doing stuff this way. And that is very true. And I think that's a big part of the fear and challenge, and why a lot of people don't take the leap to actually do the work themselves. But you learn so much in the process, and you accomplish such better work as a result of that learning and that creative, intuitive manifestation with the land as you're doing it. So I think that's why you don't see a lot of that. The places that I've seen it, it's big, broadacre agricultural context where they're not digging very deep at all. And so they can be fairly confident, or it doesn't matter so much what they're encountering. But when you're building an earthen water body, you might hit a bucket of gravel in the middle of all your clay layers and need to make sure, A, it doesn't get incorporated, and then B, why is that there? And is this an indication of something else you need to be paying attention to and shifting your plan accordingly?
No, absolutely, mate. It's even on whatever size machine, it's quite incredible what you feel through the controls. So that's something that you wouldn't get. I can't see, because it's also not the feeling also in the controls, but it's the sound of the motor. It has the hydraulics lighted up. There's all this sort of sensors again engaged. Yeah.
Nice. Well, here, one person wants to do a live question, so I'm going to unmute them. They're coming in from Water Stories Hot, so let's see who it is. Hey, hey.
Greetings. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, this is Leanne.
Hey, Leanne.
Hey, I'm in Arizona in what is currently a pretty drought-stricken time. Very little rain. And my particular location that I have personally is over 30 acres, and it doesn't have much rock, meaning that when it comes to doing spillways and other things, you don't have much of that to work with. And it does have two sizable acreages pouring onto it from two sides when the rain does happen, which hasn't been recently. And my question is, I know that you talked about, and Zach, I think, mentioned it as well, for when you're doing a spillway, you don't take down the original grade, you leave the original grade there. Now, in addition to that, let's say I don't have any rocks. Would you maybe take and put a dirt on either side of it and compact it? My neighbor has a sheep's foot on his backhoe. Or even just potentially, if you wanted to take that natural grade and put some extra dirt clay type thing on that and compact it with a sheep's foot, do you see that as beneficial when you're not going to be using rock or very few rocks?
Yeah, of course. I mean, with a sheep's foot, if you took the vegetation off and actually get a good key onto your base material, you could do it. But then you also could look at get some branches, lay the heads of the branches uphill onto your spillway. So just to pacify it, that's the advantage of having that level, is water fills up and sheets over. It's never concentrated onto a point. So you'll find if you can get that level, and if you're worried about material eroding below that level, well, biomass. Yeah, wood chips won't hold up, but the heads of trees, like branches of trees, laid down and even just cut up a bit so it gets in contact with the ground, and you can put some larger stuff across it to help pin it. Jute mesh, the sort of jute mesh that you could put down to help vegetate it. Vegetation's your ally. If you can do it and then get it vegetated, that's what locks it all into place.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I did look up, and I hadn't brought it up because I was looking into vetiver grass, which I haven't found any for sale in my area. For some reason, there's quarantines on it. It's coming from certain parts of the world. But anyway, still going to research that one. But the other one I looked into was called cereal rye. And I don't know if you have any other ones as far as that super deep rooted type scenario, because it could be, when the rain does come, it could be pretty hard because of all the upper area draining towards there.
Can't afford it. I mean, you're investing in a significant amount of work. If it's a big volume, well, then maybe look at trying to purchase some rock.
Okay.
If you're concerned about it eroding, well then, or bring your spillway out on a bigger surface area. Do the emergency spillway. Do one spillway really long.
Okay.
Do it 30 feet. Do it, 60 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good. I can get a little bit of rock around me because there's rock near me. But as far as purchasing it, I'm on a long dirt road, and the delivery is probably 3 times what.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
That you would want. So I brought in a little bit myself, but not tried to look into that part. Well, no, I really appreciate the widening of it.
Yeah.
And I'll look into that. And I do have, there's quite a bit of dead out there right now. So coming up with tree limbs and doing base hugelkultur with limbs and soil and that type of thing would
well
work.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I'm not saying do soil. What I'm saying is lay the heads of the trees at, like, if that's your spillway height, lay them there, so you create an apron of biomass for that water's force to be broken up before. That's sort of what I'm trying to say, and create your spillway longer, so you pacify, you lessen the volume on one point.
Okay. No, that sounds awesome. I'm just like so ready to, and I haven't have to save up some money to rent an excavator, but and occasionally I can get work from the neighbor, but it's kind of sporadic. But yeah, I'm so looking forward to doing a major shift because it's just been what it's been, very dry. Things are just struggling. The trees are struggling. The land is struggling right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, there's quite a profound effect of using multi-species cover crops. The whole quorum sensing 12 or more species. I mean, that's something that you could look at to create the sponge, because that's what we need to do, is we need to recreate the sponge and incorporate tree systems. So don't just think about holding what water that runs through, but also thinking about creating that, lifeboat, that small water cycle that Zach and Rayleigh talk about, building the sponge.
Yeah, yeah. And I do have access to some wood chips, so
yeah,
that there is a transfer station down the road, so that I can even add a little bit of that in wherever it seems to make sense to do
definitely.
that. But I'm so thankful to be here, because if it wasn't for being here, I'd be probably pretty depressed without solutions.
Yes, it is empowering, this journey, and we just got to start taking them baby steps and get going, because it does, it can be depressing out there, but when we engage in life rewards us, and really that's a very powerful thing, for me personally. So enjoy the journey, don't give up, just keep going.
Yeah, no, and I've been collecting cactus and succulents that people are throwing out. I'm just going to mix those all in a dry landscape. So.
Nice.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah,
appreciate it, and can't wait to hear more about what you're doing in Arizona.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you.
You got it, Chow. All right, Zach, do you see any good ones you want to answer? I see there's one from Kaylee and Steve that seemed pretty good, and then two more after that.
Yeah, we got a handful more. I got one pulled up here. Great info. Thanks, Dave. Are there any earth moving efficiency strategies you see as valuable or that you have learned? Anything you do differently to other operators in moving materials or construction of different elements?
Well, I think a lot of operators haven't spent time on a shovel. And so that makes you think about it differently. Value on your topsoil, because again, a lot of operators don't value the topsoil. Yes, look, I still watch earth movers. If I'm driving somewhere and there's a machine doing work, and if he's doing something like a tidy job, I'll still look at the techniques, of how they're doing things. I'm still learning, I'm pretty good on a machine, but I'm certainly not the best. But I think part of that is I've done a lot. Basically, I'm on my third shovel in life, and I'm going to do a potato oven one day, but I've got two worn out Australian post hole shovels, and I've got my third. And I'm hoping to wear that out because I actually enjoy it. So, efficiencies. Well, watch machine operators, for one, to learn their techniques. Certainly being able to put your bucket down and screwing your machine around on its tracks, as opposed to, turning it and butchering landscape. For America, it's just very strange. You guys, the tilt bucket, that is 30% quicker. That is 30% saving in moving the machine. Because whatever I'm doing, swale, terrace, whatever, I am cutting all my profiles from that position. So I can do the back cut, I can do the form of whatever I'm doing, I can do the other batter. That's finished. Whereas other machines without a tilt bucket, you have to move the machine to get geometry, or you have to screw it around if it's a small machine, push the blade up, frustrating. But I can also, the efficiency of skinning off the topsoil, because with a tilt bucket, I can literally skin the topsoil off. I can literally skin the vegetation layer off, because I can just skin it off. then I can actually literally clean the topsoil off to reserve it into the subsoil. So because every angle I'm every swipe I'm taking, I'm actually changing to making minute adjustments of the angle of the bucket. So the tilt bucket, and I just find it odd, particularly in America. I know Europe seems to have them, but I find it odd in America that they're not very available. They're everywhere in Australia, and have been for the last 10, 15 years. So if you want to move efficiency into an excavator and you're in the US, yeah, tilt bucket. Doesn't have to be a tilt head, you know. You don't necessarily need your tooth bucket or your grab on a bone, but the tilt mud bucket is just hooked into your remote hydraulics, and it's either on your foot, ideally on your thumb, in the cab. But that's 30% saving in time straight away. Plus, you get a cleaner job, and it gives me the funkiness.
Wholeheartedly agree. And what you do comes out better, smoother, more finished right from the get-go. Absolutely worthwhile. I too don't know why they're not more common, because they're hard to get unless you own them yourself in the United States.
Yeah.
I see a question here from Kaylee. So have either of you been involved in any swales, ponds, or dam projects for municipalities or larger systems other than individual landowners? If so, what are the main considerations for this scale of project?
Well, I personally haven't. I think it's a very different approach, I suppose, municipalities, because they want it all engineered and calculated and quantified, and that's not my realm, you know. Not to say I wouldn't do it, but you'd need a team of people to collaborate with to make it happen, because you still need that on-ground person, reality based, but you need the academia and all the tech and soil samples and all that to being involved in that realm for me.
Yeah, and I've worked a little bit in that realm, but never gotten anything done in terms of things delivered on the ground. So it's a lot of getting stakeholders to buy in, a lot of surveys, reports. I think the challenge, part of why there's not as much happening there as there should be, is in many places you're looking at $500,000 of studies before you start the project. And for David or I, you give us $500,000 and you're looking at a night and day difference on a landscape. But the project we were just visiting in Slovakia, in the Czech Republic, there it was a government sponsored program, very effective. And what they did was they paid local people by the cubic meter of water they created retention for. Wow. So local people got 5 to 10 euros for each cubic meter of water retention they created, and then they could design them and build them themselves. And that was a huge part of the success of that program. The government kept wanting them to do one big pilot project, and they said, no, if you want this to be successful, we need to try lots of different strategies at different places all throughout the country, and had local people implement the strategies that they themselves thought would make sense. And so that project was very effective, whereas a lot of these other municipal scale projects just get caught in this funding and study loop where very little happens despite lots of money and time being spent on it.
Cool.
A couple of practical questions for you. Do you always have flat bottoms on your swale basins? I see a lot of different shapes of bottoms, so I'm curious if that is your preference, and if so, why?
Well, again, you know, I think that's depends on the machine you're using. So if I'm on an excavator that doesn't have a tilt bucket, it's more likely going to be curved, isn't it? Because you're taking the back cut and you're building up the mound. So it's in that that sort of profile. If you're doing a little machine, you might be able to sit in the in line of your surveying and create. It doesn't really matter. Yes, it's going to store more water, but it doesn't. If I'm using a tilt bucket, generally I have a flat bottom because I'm actually sitting in line of my heights, my survey mark, and I'm doing the back cut, and I'm doing the floor, and I'm doing the mound and battering it off. So yes, and that's generally set at the width of the bucket. Yes, it's going to hold more water if you've got a flat bottom. I see people out there zen raking the floor of the swale. Why? It's a deposition system. Put more attention to making sure you have a freeboard and your spillway. That's where your attention needs to go, not the floor of the swale. Oh, if it's within 20 mil, that's fine. Within an inch, that's fine, because it's a deposition system. That's its aim. So don't get caught up on what you do at the floor of the swale. Put your attention to the freeboard, so water above, the mound above your spillway height, and a good spillway.
Nice.
Awesome.
Okay. Question here from Sheena. David, please clarify on using the topsoil. Is it for the surrounding areas or the bottom water body that you suggested?
Well, the topsoil should always go back over your work. So if I'm excavating a pond or a dam, I mark out the high water mark, so my water level that I'm aiming for. All the topsoil below that gets taken off, and then the topsoil at the base of your dam wall is taken off, and then you're sorting out your material. You dig your key, you're sorting your material out, you're constructing your dam wall. Once it's finished, that topsoil needs to go back on the back of the dam wall so it can vegetate. The high water from the top of the dam wall to the high water mark or below it if you want aquatic species. So you got to think of putting the topsoil on it's like putting the skin back on. We need to regrow our bare soil, because that's where the erosion happens. If you don't put the topsoil back on, and a bit of a scatter mulch, because they say on a 30% cover on a square meter of mulch stops 70% of erosion. So getting the topsoil back on, often topsoil is full of seed, so it vegetates pretty smartly. Yes, you can put a cover crop on. I don't get caught up in doing the green manure cover crop, just whatever seeds is around. But seeding it out is good, but it's critical to put the topsoil back on so it can revegetate. Any of your subsoil and clay, well, that's going to take a long time. And if it's got a steepness or a batter about it, everything's running off it. So to relay the topsoil back on it is, particularly around dams. Swales, I don't really worry about. Yes, it's a bit more time. You can skin your topsoil off and relay it over the top. That's fine. Depends on the context. If you're doing it for yourself, fine, do it. And again, that's where a tilt bucket makes it a lot easier to do that nice finish. But just getting the skin back on, I like to say put its clothes back on, because that's what it does. You brutalize the landscape, you open it up, and it's susceptible to erosion. But when you put the topsoil back on, then it's covered up. It's protected.
And that's what really makes this, jarring, scarring endeavor that we do really worthwhile. And in that it recovers quickly because of the care we take to help it do that. You see other earthworks projects that 2-3 years later, there's barely any grass growing, and it's because they didn't sort their topsoil. they compacted the smithereens out of everything and didn't leave behind a growing medium. And so, yeah, it looks like a scar for a long time because it is, whereas we're very carefully, putting the clothing back on, setting it up to then move into a state of health as quickly as possible.
Yep. Beautifully said, mate. Yep.
Well, looks like we got two more questions here, one from Stella and another from Anita, and that could be a good place to end the webinar. Okay, so Stella's asking, what can be done on a rocky landscape to retain water? She's saying, I'm in Croatia. There's no clay. There's only about 20 centimeters of red soil and then rock or limestone. Yeah, what can you do on really rocky landscapes to retain water?
Is it loose rock or is it just like a sheet rock like limestone? I mean, doing one of the most profound things, I worked on a project in the high Atlas of Morocco. It was for a school, Ecole Vivien, and we done little smiley berms, little smiley faces up on the mountain. And what was quite profound is it was for a school, and the school kids took that technique to their farms and started doing it because they observed it's a deposition system. So you've only got to create a deposition system to start retaining water in the landscape. Start at the top, do pattern recognition. So where's the water moving? And then again, another pattern application. If there's a slight valley, if there's runnels, whatever, whether it's rock or biomass, I say to people, run a line of wood chips out. You're not in a valley, but you run a line of wood chips out across a slope. Look at what happens. Well, it's created a deposition system. If you've got woody biomass, do what they call a bioswale. So lay some trees down, wood branches, cut them up so they get in contact with the ground. Start building that sponge. If you start high, then you might be surprised what comes out lower.
Beautifully said. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and Stella was saying they had sheetrock was their rock.
Okay. Well, yeah. So it's whether it's either try to get some rock or woody biomass.
And really, I've been amazed with some of our students in situations where they explain their soil type, and I'm like, oh, that's going to be a tough thing to work with. But, they actually accomplish really incredible things because creating that deposition of water, organic material, fine sediment, that sometimes surprisingly quickly creates more and more of the conditions for life. And so it's not that you need to hold water throughout the year for holding water to be beneficial. Even if you're just making the water that would have been there one day stay there for 4 days, or that would have run off, soak in and make some of that rock wet, or find the vertical fracturing, like David was explaining with the other project, where that vertical fracturing was, all this organic material and soil had accumulated. I think you need to be really picky about the spots that you choose to work in that kind of scenario so that you find the areas that you can be most effective, learn from the intervention. I mean, same as you were saying earlier, David, with just throwing the rocks into a drainage and watching what happens. Anywhere that water is flowing, create some type of impediment to it, some interaction point to it that makes it slow down, that helps it infiltrate. And you'll pretty quickly learn what is and what is not worth the time to do, I think.
Absolutely, mate.
Yes, I guess last question here from Anita.
Well, we've got one I forgot about too, Raleigh, just FYI.
Sure.
That'll kind of thread into this one as well, I think, in a way.
Yeah, go for it.
So one question from these are going to seem very unrelated, but I think there is a fairly related answer. One question from Marco. He's working in the Netherlands, and is a problem that's probably unique for unique for the Netherlands, because of the huge eutrophication problems that they have. Regulations on nitrogen emissions are very strict. near sensitive Natura 2000 areas, buildings, or digging is almost impossible. Electrical machines are an option, but are still rare and heavily in demand. Not asking for a solution for you, but it's frustrating to see good water retention plans fail because of another environmental problem. And then the other question would be, could you advise the best ways to design a dam for indigenous Maasai people in Kenya who've had 4 years of drought, red soil? We have regenerated and installed water collection, but cheapest dams needed. And I guess just to maybe give a little sense of how I think these are related, I've been really impressed this year by the level of things that can be accomplished working by hand. And I think for one, you learn so much better. So I'd advise everyone to start working with the shovel because you're going to learn everything better, even if you need to work with the machine for your scale. But then also a group of determined people can accomplish a lot working in unison by hand. So do you have any thoughts, David, about how you would go about maybe implementing something in Kenya with the Maasai people and how you would look at doing a water retention feature there?
Yeah, oh, well, I think, that's, you've just nailed it, is well, one, education. Don't come in and dictate to them. Teach them, or demonstrate, how they can take it on. As you're talking about Croatia, that vested interest, like the Waterman of India, the vested interest in the community, give them a sense of ownership. Absolutely, what can be achieved, like back to Netherlands, by hand, water retention by hand, a few friends, and then for Kenya, what could be achieved? Ludovic Boron from Abundant by Nature, who I think he's a subscriber to you guys. Great guy, Ludovic. He's in somewhere in Africa right now, and they've done a pond, they've done terraces, they've done footpaths, all water retention, all by hand. They tried it themselves. They, made a few mistakes. Obviously, they've got Ludovic in, and he's directing a crew. I don't know, it could be 15, 20 people. Huge achievements by hand. And the best part is they're learning it. So when Ludovic goes home, they're not like, oh, the master's gone, what do we do? The machinery operator hasn't come in and done the work. They've been engaged in it. They've got muscle memory, Yes, it's a bit of hard work, but God, it's rewarding. As Zach was saying before, you take the open up the landscape and then repattern it and put the topsoil back in. Once it's vegetated, it's gorgeous. You've got this emotional engagement into the landscape, a sense of ownership, like imparting, passion. So start small, baby steps, baby mistakes. That's what, like, if you're looking at for the Maasai in Africa, check out Nat Topa's work, her sponge village stuff. I mean, you're not going to get a better example of a diversity of approaches based on actually moderating extreme climates, but also harvesting water and storing it and managing water. Check out Nat Topa's work. She's the go-to person there, or Ludovic. But, Nat's she's a powerhouse, that woman. Huge respect to her.
We have two, almost three webinars. I think three now we've done with Natalie Topa. I can pop some links in the chat for you. Let me just find that. But they're all on our Water Stories YouTube channel.
Just like David was saying about how when you're doing it by hand, you really need to pay attention and do things smartly. Moving that material downhill becomes that much more important if you don't have this diesel hydraulic machine to move it uphill for you. I think along the same lines, reading the land and doing things in the right place becomes even more important by hand, because you really can't just dig a hole anywhere and expect it to fill with water. You've got to read the points in the land where water's collecting and concentrating, where clay's been depositing, where material's been depositing that you can work with. And so it's for that reason an even better way to learn as well, because then you'll just be more and more effective when it comes to working with machines. We did a training this summer in Mozambique with a local community. We trained them over 5 days. We built one water body with them. Amazing. It started filling the next day, and people were already using it to water their gardens and to wash their clothing and all of this. And then as soon as we left, they built 26 more of these water bodies, all by hand, all compacting by foot. But it only was successful because we trained them to be very specific about where to build those features. And so I think it's the very best way to learn, because your reading of the landscape needs to be on point. Your compaction and handling of materials needs to be on point. You need to be super efficient with your movements. And if you can do those things, you're really set up to do amazing things once you get some diesel at your tailwind.
100%, mate. Definitely, nail on the head, observation. That's key to moving forward. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing webinar, David. You just got such a wealth of experience, and so humble and amazing, and willing to share all of everything that you have, which I really appreciate. Just so much appreciate the way you go about this type of work and how open and sharing you are with others. So to everyone here, I want to tell you to follow David's work, docspice.life, which I just put into the chat, and Doc Spicer on Instagram. Work with this guy, learn from this guy, follow his work. I've learned a ton just from following from afar, and I know all of you can as well. David, do you want to leave us with some closing thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think, collaboration is where it's at these days, and this is collaboration. That's how we're going to move forward. And so, yeah, let's not be sort of cultists and stick to one paradigm, one form, observation, whatever works in the context you're in. Be a bit brave, try things, but try them on small scales. But just got to get going, guys. We've got to do it. It's, the taking, like I say, we only got to take one step in the right direction. Nature takes 10. And that, for me, often is water. But it's profound. When you create a deposition system, what happens? You don't have to do anything because life populates it. Water's the ultimate vehicle of mover of nutrients and minerals and all that, look, organic. So we just got to work with water. We've got to relearn to observe. That's critical. Be humble, and assist life to move forward, because we can really build some incredible lifeboats. Because I see that as really needed these days. We need to actually build these life support systems around our human habitats. Yes, it's great to go out on the broader landscape and do huge projects. That's fantastic. But if we come back to an ecological desert, what's that worth? Because we can create extremely engaging, rewarding systems around our houses. We don't all have to race off to the big broad landscape. Yes, it's cool doing, jumping on a big machine and doing a big impact on landscape, but we all don't have to do that. We can, at least do something around our immediate environment. We can learn how water moves, how we can interact with water and allow it to create that deposition system, and we can influence what comes from that, or we can just allow nature to express itself.